return that shocked the entire NBA. Kawhi Leonard was supposed to be finished with Toronto forever. That was the story everyone believed. He came, he delivered the greatest moment in Raptors history. He lifted the trophy, and then he disappeared to Los Angeles like the chapter had been closed for good. But now, 7 years later, the same quiet superstar who once broke Toronto's heart may be walking right back into the building where he became immortal. And this time, the price is almost unbelievable. The Raptors are reportedly bringing Kawhi Leonard back in a massive deal that sends Brandon Ingram, Gradey Dick, multiple first-round picks, a pick swap, and extra second-rounders to the Clippers. That is not a small move. That is not a cautious move. That is a front office pushing every chip to the center of the table and daring the entire NBA to question them. Because Kawhi is not just another veteran star. He is the man who gave Toronto its only championship. He is the name that still makes Raptors fans remember that wild 2019 run. The shot, the parade, the belief that for one impossible season, Toronto owned the basketball world. But here is where the story gets dangerous. Kawhi is now 35, his injury history is real, his playoff availability has been questioned for years, and yet Toronto is reportedly preparing to talk about an extension that could climb past $120 million over 2 years. That is not nostalgia money. That is championship or bust money. So why would the Raptors do this? Because when Kawhi is healthy, he still changes everything. He gives Scottie Barnes the closer he has never had. He gives Toronto a proven playoff killer. He gives that defense another terrifying wing. And most importantly, he gives the franchise something it has been chasing ever since he left: belief. But belief can be expensive. Around the league, the reaction has already exploded. Some people see a genius move. Some see a desperate gamble. Some see the Raptors trying to make lightning strike twice in the same city with the same man. And some fans still cannot forget that Kawhi already left once when Toronto wanted him to stay. That is what makes this story more than a trade. It is a reunion, a risk, a business power play, and maybe the final chapter of one of the strangest superstar careers in NBA history. Kawhi is not just returning to Toronto. He is returning to the scene of his greatest triumph, carrying the weight of old memories, new money, and a league-wide question that nobody can ignore. Did the Raptors just buy themselves another miracle? Or did they pay a historic price for a heartbreak they should have seen coming? Before we go deeper, let me know where you are watching from right now. Are you in Toronto, Los Angeles, New York, Miami, or somewhere else? Drop your city in the comments. And if you believe Kawhi can bring the Raptors back to championship contention, comment 1. If you think Toronto just made a dangerous mistake, comment 2. Don't forget to subscribe, because this story is only getting crazier from here. Why Kawhi chose Toronto? Again, what makes this story so much bigger than a normal superstar trade is that Kawhi Leonard did not look like a man being dragged into a new situation. He looked like a man choosing the one place nobody thought he would choose again. That changes everything, because when a superstar gets moved, the first question is usually simple. Did the team want him, or did he want the team? In this case, the answer appears to be both. Toronto wanted the old magic back, but Kawhi reportedly wanted the same thing. He wanted the city, he wanted the familiarity, he wanted the franchise that once handed him the perfect stage to remind the world who he was, and maybe, deep down, he wanted a different ending. The first time Kawhi came to Toronto, nobody knew how long it would last. Raptors fans loved the championship, but they also knew he could leave. And he did. He took the ring, the Finals MVP, the memories, and walked into the Los Angeles spotlight. Toronto celebrated him, but there was always a scar underneath the applause. Now that scar is being reopened, but this time, the emotion feels different. This does not feel like a rental built on uncertainty. It feels like a superstar looking at the final chapters of his career and deciding that the place he left behind may actually be the place where he wants to finish. That is why other teams never had full control of the conversation. If Kawhi was not interested in signing long-term anywhere else, then every rival front office was negotiating against a wall. Minnesota could call, Detroit could check in, other teams could dream. But if Leonard's mind was already set on Toronto, the market was never truly open. That is power, and it tells the league something important. Kawhi Leonard may be quiet, but quiet does not mean passive. He has always moved differently. He does not give emotional speeches. He does not feed the media every thought. He simply makes decisions, and the rest of the NBA has to react. This time, his decision brought him back north. Back to the arena where fans once chanted his name like he was more than a player. Back to the franchise that still measures every era against the 1 year he gave them. Back to the city that never really stopped wondering what might have happened if he had stayed. Now he is here again. And the real question is not whether Toronto forgives him. The real question is whether Kawhi came back to finish a story or to rewrite one. The price. Toronto had to pay. Toronto did not just make a trade. Toronto made a declaration. When a team sends out Brandon Ingram, Gradey Dick, multiple first-round picks, a pick swap, and second-round value, it is not making a small adjustment. It is not tweaking the roster. It is not quietly improving around the edges. That is the kind of move that tells the entire league one thing. We are done waiting. But the dangerous part is who they made the bet on. Kawhi Leonard is not 27 anymore. He is not the mystery superstar who walked into Toronto in 2018 with 1 year left on his deal and a point to prove. He is older now. His body has carried years of playoff wars, injuries, rest management debates, and postseason absences. Every executive in the league knows what he can still be when he is healthy, but every executive also knows the same terrifying question follows him everywhere. How many nights can you actually count on him? That is why the price looks so wild. Brandon Ingram is not just salary filler. He is a proven scorer, a player who can create offense, a name with real value. Gradey Dick is not just a throw-in. He is a young shooter, a former lottery pick, the type of player teams usually try to develop, not sacrifice. And the draft capital matters because picks are the oxygen of the modern NBA. They give teams flexibility. They give front offices second chances. They protect franchises from one bad gamble destroying everything. Toronto gave up a lot of that oxygen, and they did it because Kawhi Leonard represents something no pick can guarantee: a championship ceiling. That is the painful math of the NBA. A young player might become special. A draft pick might turn into a star. A future asset might become the piece that saves a franchise. But Kawhi has already been that piece. He has already walked into Toronto and turned a good team into a champion. He has already proven that when the lights are brightest and his body allows it, he can be the coldest closer in the building. That memory is power, maybe too powerful, because the front office is not only paying for the Kawhi of today, it is also paying for the ghost of 2019. It is paying for the parade, the banner, the shot, the belief, the feeling that one player can change everything in one spring. But nostalgia can become expensive if you mistake it for certain. Toronto's gamble is clear. If Kawhi stays healthy, the price could look bold, even brilliant. If he breaks down, the same deal could become a warning that hangs over the franchise for years. And that is the cruel truth of this trade. The Raptors did not buy safety. They bought a chance. The locker room aftershock. The moment Kawhi Leonard walks back into the Raptors locker room, every role changes. That is what superstar trades do. They do not simply add talent. They rearrange status, responsibility, pressure, and expectation. One day, players understand where they stand. The next day, a finals MVP walks through the door, and suddenly everyone has to figure out who they are again. For Scottie Barnes, this could be the gift he has been waiting for. Scottie has carried the weight of being the future of the franchise, but every young star eventually needs help that makes the game easier. He needed a closer. He needed someone defenses fear late in the fourth quarter. He needed a player who could take the impossible possession, slow the game down, and turn chaos into a clean shot. Kawhi can still be that player. If Leonard is healthy, Barnes no longer has to force everything. He can defend, create, run the floor, punish mismatches, and grow without needing to be the answer on every final possession. That could unlock the best version of him. Not because Kawhi replaces him, but because Kawhi gives him room to become more complete. But RJ Barrett's situation is more complicated. Barrett is not just another player on this roster. He is Canadian. He has emotional value to the fan base. He has had major moments in a Raptors uniform. And when a player like that survives trade rumors, the message from the front office matters. If Toronto chose to move Brandon Ingram instead of Barrett, that says something. It says RJ still has a place in the plan, but a place in the plan is not the same as a guaranteed role. With Kawhi back, touches become harder to find. Shot hierarchy gets tighter, late game possessions become more political. Barrett has to prove he can fit next to Barnes and Leonard without forcing the issue. He has to defend, cut, attack in rhythm, and accept that some nights he may not be the main story. That is where chemistry becomes everything. On paper, Toronto suddenly looks more dangerous. Barnes gives them size and energy. Kawhi gives them control and playoff experience. Barrett gives them downhill pressure and emotional fire. The defense can become nasty. The offense has a real closer. The crowd has a reason to believe again. But locker rooms are not built on paper. They are built on trust. And trust will decide whether this becomes a championship push or a quiet power struggle. If Barnes embraces the help, if Barrett accepts the adjustment, if Kawhi leads without creating distance, Toronto can become one of the most uncomfortable teams in the East. But if roles become unclear, if egos get bruised, if the old Kawhi mystery returns, the same move that raised the ceiling could shake the foundation. That is the part nobody can ignore. The Raptors did not just trade for Kawhi Leonard. They traded for a new locker room reality. The agent change, nobody can ignore. Then came the detail that made the entire league pause. Kawhi Leonard changed his representation right as the extension talks with Toronto were about to begin. For most players, that might sound like business. A new contract, a new agent, a new voice in the room. It happens. But with Kawhi, nothing around his business world ever feels simple, because his career has always been surrounded by silence, control, and people trying to understand who is really making the decisions. That is why this move landed different. For years, Dennis Robertson was not just known as Kawhi's uncle. He was viewed as one of the most important figures in Leonard's career. He was part of the inner circle. He was tied to major decisions. He was always somewhere near the conversation when Kawhi's future was being discussed. Now, suddenly, as Toronto prepares to talk about a massive short-term extension, the room changes. That timing is impossible to ignore. Kawhi's new representative, Harrison Gaines, steps into one of the most sensitive negotiations in the NBA. He is not taking over a small deal. He is walking into a situation involving more than $120 million, a former finals MVP, a franchise trying to recreate history, and a league investigation still hanging over the team Kawhi just left. That is not a normal negotiation. That is a pressure chamber. And the question becomes obvious. Why now? Why change the voice at the table at this exact moment? Why move away from longtime advisors right when the Raptors are preparing to commit enormous money? Why reshape the business circle while the league is still reviewing old questions connected to Kawhi's Clippers era? Nobody has to accuse anyone of anything to understand why people are talking. The optics alone are powerful. To some, this looks like maturity. Maybe Kawhi wants a cleaner structure. Maybe he wants a more professional negotiation. Maybe he understands that if Toronto is going to become his final NBA home, the next deal needs to be handled carefully, quietly, and without distraction. To others, it looks like damage control, because the NBA is not only watching what Toronto offers, it is watching how the offer is negotiated. After years of questions around side benefits, endorsements, and salary cap concerns, Leonard's camp cannot afford another messy process. Every number matters. Every meeting matters. Every person in the room matters, and that is what makes this agent change such a major part of the story. It is not as loud as the trade package, it is not as emotional as the return to Toronto, but it might be just as important, because before Kawhi can write the final chapter of his career, he has to make sure the business side does not turn into another storm. This move was not made on the court, but it may decide everything that happens next. The shadow from Los Angeles. But while Toronto celebrates Kawhi Leonard's return, one shadow still follows him from Los Angeles. The Clippers chapter is not fully closed. Reports around the NBA investigation into the Clippers' aspiration and the alleged salary cap concerns have made this reunion more complicated than a normal homecoming. This is not just about Kawhi wearing a Raptors jersey again. It is about whether the business surrounding his last stop could still affect the way people view this entire move. That is why Toronto's front office had to be careful. They were not just trading for a superstar. They were trading for a superstar with history, injury concerns, a huge contract situation, and an unresolved cloud from his Clippers era. Maybe the Raptors felt confident the risk was manageable. Maybe both teams received enough quiet assurance to move forward. But confidence is not the same as final closure. And until the league officially moves on, this story cannot be completely clean. For Kawhi, the timing is critical. He is trying to start a new chapter while questions from the old one still echo behind him. For Toronto, the challenge is even bigger. They must convince fans that this is about basketball, not baggage. They must protect their investment, protect their young core, and make sure this return does not become a distraction before it becomes a success. Because if the investigation fades, the focus returns to the court. But if it grows louder, then every dollar, every pick, and every decision Toronto made will be questioned all over again. Is Kawhi still worth the money? The entire gamble comes down to one question. Is Kawhi Leonard still worth superstar money? When he is healthy, the answer is yes. Kawhi can still slow the game down, punish defenders, hit difficult shots, defend with strength, and bring playoff.com that most teams never find. He gives Toronto something it has been missing since he left, a closer who does not panic when the game gets tight. That matters for Scottie Barnes. Barnes no longer has to carry every late game possession by himself. With Kawhi beside him, he can defend, create, attack, and grow without being forced to solve every problem. That could make Toronto more balanced, more dangerous, and much harder to beat in a playoff series. But the risk is obvious. Kawhi's body is the question. His talent is not. The Raptors are not worried about whether he can still play. They are worried about whether he can stay available when the games matter most. A regular season flash is not enough. Toronto needs him in April, May, and maybe June. That is why this contract feels so dangerous. If Kawhi stays healthy, the money could look like the price of a second miracle. If he misses too much time, it could become one of the most expensive risks in franchise history. Toronto is not paying for memory. They are paying for one last championship window. And now Kawhi has to prove that the player who once changed everything in Toronto still has enough left to do it again. Toronto's new identity, this move tells the league exactly what Toronto wants to become. The Raptors are not trying to be patient anymore. They are not just building slowly around young talent. They are trying to become a serious playoff threat right now. Their new identity is clear: size, defense, toughness, and pressure. Kawhi Leonard fits that vision. Scottie Barnes fits it too. RJ Barrett brings energy and attack. Together, they give Toronto a roster with physical wings, defensive versatility, and enough scoring power to make the Eastern Conference pay attention. But the balance will not be easy. Kawhi needs touches, but he also needs rest. Barnes needs room to grow, but he also needs to learn how to win beside a veteran superstar. Barrett needs a clear role, not a confusing one. The coaching staff has to manage all of this without letting the team lose rhythm. That is the challenge of mixing a young core with an aging champion. If Toronto gets it right, they could become a nightmare matchup. They can defend, switch, attack mismatches, and close games with Kawhi's experience. But if the roles become unclear, the same roster that looks dangerous on paper could become frustrating in reality. This is no longer just Scottie's development story. This is no longer just Kawhi's comeback story. This is Toronto trying to build a new identity from an old memory, and that is always risky. Because the Raptors are not simply asking Kawhi to return. They are asking him to help turn belief back into a real championship threat. The three possible endings. There are three ways this story can end. The first ending is the dream. Kawhi signs the extension, stays healthy, and gives Toronto exactly what it needs. Scottie Barnes rises, RJ Barrett accepts his role, the defense becomes elite, the Raptors become the team nobody wants to face in the playoffs. In that version, Toronto looks bold, not reckless. The second ending is the nightmare. Kawhi signs, but the health problems return. The rhythm disappears. The picks Toronto traded away start to feel more painful. The young players lose time, the pressure grows, and fans begin asking whether the franchise paid for the memory of 2019 instead of the reality of 2026. That is the fear. The third ending is the messy middle. Kawhi plays well, but not enough. Toronto improves, but not enough. The team becomes interesting, but not truly dangerous. The trade is not a disaster, but it is not a miracle either. And that may be the hardest ending to accept, because it leaves everyone arguing about whether the risk was worth it. That is where the Raptors stand now, between hope and hesitation, between the legend Kawhi used to be and the player he still might be. Toronto remembers the championship, the fans remember the parade, the league remembers what Kawhi can do when healthy, but the future will not be decided by memory. It will be decided by availability, chemistry, trust, and whether this second chance can survive the pressure that comes with it. Miracle or heartbreak. When you step back from the emotion, Toronto's strategy becomes clear. The Raptors chose urgency. They looked at Scottie Barnes, looked at the Eastern Conference, looked at their own roster, and decided that waiting was no longer enough. They could have protected every asset. They could have played safe. They could have stayed flexible and hoped the perfect star became available later. Instead, they chose the one player who already proved he could change the history of their franchise. That is bold. But bold does not always mean right. The lesson here is bigger than one trade. In the NBA, every franchise eventually faces a moment where patience and ambition collide. If you wait too long, your window can close before it opens. If you move too fast, you can mortgage the future for a dream that never arrives. Toronto is walking that line right now. Kawhi Leonard represents both sides of that truth. He is the miracle and the warning. He is the reason Raptors fans believe anything is possible, and he is also the reason some fans are afraid to trust the story again. He gave Toronto its greatest basketball memory, then left before that love could become a dynasty. Now he is back, older, richer, and surrounded by more questions than ever. But maybe that is what makes this final chapter meaningful. Sports are not only about perfect decisions, they are about people trying to make peace with unfinished stories. Kawhi may be trying to close his career in the place where he reached his highest point. Toronto may be trying to prove that one magical season was not just luck. Scottie Barnes may be getting the mentor and closer he needs to understand what winning at the highest level really demands. Still, everyone involved has to handle this with humility. Kawhi has to respect the young core. The Raptors have to protect his body, not just his brand. The front office has to be honest with fans about the risk, and the fan base has to understand that chasing greatness always comes with the possibility of pain. That is the human side of this story. A reunion can be beautiful, but only if it is built on honesty. A second chance can be powerful, but only if people learn from the first ending. And a championship dream can inspire a city, but it should never blind a franchise to reality. So now the basketball world waits. Will Kawhi Leonard give Toronto one more miracle? Will Scottie Barnes rise beside him? Will this massive extension become the final masterpiece of a legendary career? Or the most expensive rerun of heartbreak the Raptors have ever seen? If you believe Kawhi can bring Toronto back into the championship conversation, comment 1. If you think the Raptors gave up too much and this will end badly, comment 2. And if you are watching from Toronto, Los Angeles, New York, Miami, Chicago, or anywhere across the world, drop your city in the comments right now. Make sure you subscribe, like the video, and share it with another NBA fan because this story is not finished. It is only beginning.